Chapter 1: The Taste of Rust. Metal scraped against stone, and the sound went straight through the bones. Cold water slapped the ankles. Not gently. Not like a warning. Like a hand that didn't ask permission. The river stank of mud, gasoline, and something older, something coppery. Blood has a smell. Rust has a taste. Fear has a temperature. A boot slipped on slime. Someone swore. Low. Hoarse. The kind of curse people use when God is far and the dark is close. The flashlight beam jumped like a nervous animal, skimming across broken reeds, a half-sunken tire, bubbles rising from black water. The beam caught on a face for half a second. White. Not dead. Not alive either. Just emptied. A siren howled somewhere far away. Or maybe it was inside someone's skull. A hand grabbed a wet sleeve. "Don't look," a voice said. Too late. The metal object in the water shifted. Chain. Hook. Something not meant for play. The river kept moving, slow and patient, like it had done this before. Like it would do it again. And the worst part? Somewhere upstream, children had been laughing only hours before. The water didn't care. It never does. Their footprints, soft in the mud, were already filling with water. Already erasing themselves. The night air tasted like wet iron and old leaves. The kind of air that sits in your lungs and refuses to leave. A shape drifted past the flashlight beam. Wood. Cloth. A secret. No one reached for it. Not yet. The siren got louder. And someone whispered, almost amused, almost broken. They always think the river gives back what it takes. The river rolled on. Dark. Quiet. Hungry. Chapter 2: The Question Nobody Asks. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Not a polite ring. Not a patient one. It screamed. Metal against metal. A sound that climbed into the bones and refused to leave. The kind of call that never brings good news, only bills, bodies, or both. A man sat up in bed too fast. Sweat glued the sheet to his back. The room smelled like old coffee and cheap aftershave. His fingers shook as they closed around the receiver. Yeah, he breathed. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The listening kind. Then a voice. Low. Flat. Tired. 2 boys. Missing. By the river. The words landed softly and ruined everything anyway. You think the truth always sits next to the victim, don't you? You think the smaller the body, the bigger the innocence. You think a lost child is always just lost. You're wrong. Because tonight is about 2 boys who disappeared without a scream anyone admits hearing. And a town that learned something ugly about itself but decided it looked better in the dark. This is the story of a river near Albany. A strip of dirty water that carried beer bottles, dead fish, industrial waste, and, according to polite society, nothing more. This is the story of laughter that stopped too suddenly. And adults who didn't run fast enough, didn't search long enough, and didn't ask the right question when it mattered. The right question wasn't, where are they? The right question was, who needed them not to be found? In 1951, America was teaching its children to hide under desks in case the sky caught fire. Duck and cover. Smile for the camera. Trust your neighbor. Trust your government. Trust the water. 2 boys trusted the water. They walked down to the river wearing clothes that smelled like soap and house dust. Rolled up pants. Scuffed shoes. Pockets full of air and stupid, beautiful courage. No one saw the moment things went wrong. Or everyone did. That depends on who you believe, and who had something to lose. By morning, their names were being whispered like prayers and passed like cigarettes. People said, accident, before they said, search. People said, boys will be boys, before they said, call the police. People said nothing when the men with clipboards showed up. And somewhere in the dark, the river dragged a secret along its bed, slow and careful, like it had all the time in the world. It did. The town just didn't know it yet. Chapter 3: Town of Clean Faces. Albany wore its respectability like a cheap suit. Pressed too tight. Shiny in all the wrong places. In 1951, the air smelled of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and moral superiority. The kind of town where men tipped their hats to preachers and tipped their bottles behind the church. Where curtains were starched and secrets were soft and everywhere. The river cut along the edge of town like a vein you didn't like to look at. People said it was ugly water. People said it was dangerous. People also dumped their trash into it at night and pretended the current was a janitor sent by God. The boys fit the town the way loose change fits a pocket. Thomas and Eddie. That's what the papers would later call them. Simple. Clean. Easier to print than the things people really thought about them. Thomas wore a shirt that always smelled faintly of machine oil because his father worked too many hours and hugged him too little. Eddie's sneakers had holes in the soles and dreams stuck in the laces. He talked fast, walked faster, and laughed like he was stealing something. Thomas spoke softly. Listened hard. The kind of boy adults liked because he didn't remind them of their failures. Eddie was the kind they watched. Their houses were 10 minutes apart, but their lives were closer. Both homes had radios that hummed with bad news and better lies. Both kitchens had tables with one leg that wobbled. Both mothers said, "Be back before dark," like darkness was a curfew and not a natural law. The river was their freedom. Not the soft, poetic kind. The real kind. Wet socks. Cold toes. Rotten logs. Frogs that leapt like badly timed jokes. They called themselves the Frog Boys because they could squat low, leap far, and sit silent by the reeds for what felt like hours. Black humor came free with the mud. "If we die out here," Eddie said once, flicking a pebble into the water, "they'll name a park after us." "Or a sewer," Thomas said, serious as a preacher. They laughed like small men who didn't believe in monuments. Adults walked past them on the bridge and didn't see them. Or pretended not to. Clean hats. Clean shoes. Dirty hands. Everyone in town had a job. Factory men. Shop girls. Clerks. A police force that looked better on paper than in action. And somewhere inside all those pressed shirts lived a tiny agreement: don't look too hard at the river. Because if you stared too long, you might see what it was really carrying. The boys didn't care. They only cared about skipping stones, counting tadpoles, and proving that they were faster, braver, quieter than anyone else. They didn't know they were practicing for disappearance. Not yet. Chapter 4, The Day the River Closed. Heat sat on the town like a wet blanket. The kind of heat that glued shirts to skin and made every breath feel borrowed. The sky was pale and indifferent. Even the birds were quiet, as if they'd signed some private agreement with silence. Thomas and Eddie reached the river before noon. The rocks were slick with green slime. Rusted cans slept in the shallows like tiny submarines. A broken shopping cart leaned sideways in the reeds, half-heartedly trying to escape. "Race you to the bend," Eddie said, already running. Thomas followed. He always followed. That was the silent contract. Their shoes stayed on the bank. Their socks stayed in a pile. Childhood shed like a skin that was too warm to wear. The water was colder than it looked. It always was. It slid up their legs like a slow, curious animal. It smelled like mud and gasoline and secrets that never floated. They laughed. They splashed. They pretended the river was a clean thing. On the bridge above, a car slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. A man's face behind the glass. Hat tilted. Eyes too still. Someone was watching, Eddie whispered later. But later is a strange word. It assumes there is a before and an after that makes sense. At around midday, the sun mean and direct, a woman on the far bank heard a shout. Not a scream. A shout. She looked up, shaded her eyes, saw nothing she felt qualified to explain, and went back to her laundry. By early afternoon, the laughter had stopped. Shoes sat abandoned on the bank. Neatly. Too neatly. The current folded over stones where small hands had been just minutes before. Frogs sat in the grass, blinking like tiny, wet judges. A boy's stick, carved with lazy initials, floated downstream and bumped softly against the shopping cart. On the bridge, tire marks. Fresh. Unremarkable. Perfect. By the time a fisherman wandered by and noticed the shoes, he did the most human thing possible. He waited. He didn't want to be wrong. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want to be the first man to say the wrong words. Finally, he muttered, "Damn kids," and walked toward town. And somewhere under the surface, the river closed its fingers. Quietly. Politely. Like it was just doing its job. Chapter 5, Paper, Smoke, and Boots. The police station smelled like boiled coffee and old decisions. Wooden desks scarred by years of nervous tapping. Ashtrays overflowing like tiny gray mountains. A fan in the corner that moved air without improving it. The walls held calendars from better days and worse administrations. Boots hit the floor in tired rhythm. A sergeant with a face like folded cardboard leaned over a file. His name tag said Harris, but his eyes said he hadn't slept properly since Truman was still surprising people. 2 kids, he muttered, flipping pages that didn't yet exist. River. Summer. Of course. The first reports arrived like bad excuses. Shoes found by the bank. No blood. No struggle. No witnesses who felt confident enough to be useful. A fisherman who had a feeling but hated feelings on paper. A laundress who heard something loud and decided loud could be anything. Paperwork began to pile up. Pens scratched. Coffee cooled. And with every word written, the story became cleaner than reality ever was. Harris walked down to the river with 2 uniformed boys who smelled like starch and fear. Their boots bit into the mud. The mud bit back. "Search the bend," he said. They did. Sticks were pushed into the water. Reeds were kicked. A dead fish was poked like it might confess. Nothing. Someone joked, maybe they grew gills. Nobody laughed properly. That's always a sign. The official word crept in early. Accident. The most useful word in the language. It fit nicely on reports. It comforted city officials. It made the river look less like an accomplice and more like an idiot. Harris didn't like it. He stared at the water too long. His cigarette burned down to his fingers, and he didn't notice. Or didn't care. Something was wrong. He couldn't put it in the box marked evidence, but it sat heavy in the box marked gut. A pair of men in better suits showed up before sunset. Not police. Not press. Clean shoes. Clean hands. Smiles that didn't touch their eyes. "Make it neat," one of them said quietly. "Make it simple," said the other. Harris watched them leave tire tracks that were deeper than they should have been. And for the first time, he understood this wasn't about 2 boys. This was about how badly grown men needed the world to stay clean on paper. Chapter 6, The Lies That Sounded Better. The town swallowed the story like medicine. Bitter, but comforting. Newspapers loved it. Simple words. Safe words. The kind that didn't make advertisers nervous. Tragedy at the river. Boys presumed drowned. Presumed was a beautiful word. It meant you didn't have to find anything. You just had to stop looking. At the corner bar, men leaned over warm beer and colder opinions. "Kids are stupid," one said, like it was a science. "River's always been a killer," said another, who had thrown his own trash into it for 30 years. A third man laughed. Not because it was funny. Because silence felt worse. "If I'd fallen in there, I'd at least float back up," he said. Kids nowadays don't even have the decency to leave a body. Black humor slid across the counter, sticky and cruel. Behind those jokes was something else. Relief. Because if the boys just fell in, then no one had to wonder what kind of town they were living in. Rumors moved faster than the current. A runaway story appeared. Then disappeared. A traveling carnival rumor surfaced without a carnival. A man with a scar was described by 5 people who had never seen him. Mothers locked doors earlier. Fathers smoked more. Kids were warned about the river in voices that shook. Sergeant Harris kept looking. He checked downstream. Then upstream. He poked through brush that clawed at his uniform. He found an old tire with a rope tied around it. Training tool, someone said. He untied it anyway. At night, the river didn't sound like water to him. It sounded like whispering. He started noticing things that didn't make it into reports. A neighbor who washed his car at midnight 2 days after the disappearance. A truck parked too long near the bridge. Footprints that didn't look like children's. "You're chasing ghosts," a fellow officer told him, chewing on a toothpick like it owed him money. "Ghosts leave more honest tracks," Harris answered. The jokes got darker. The search got quieter. The official story got stronger. Because lies that sound better don't need proof. They just need tired people. And somewhere out there, something real was floating, sinking, or being very carefully avoided. Chapter 7, Someone Was Watching. The man in the car didn't belong to the river. He belonged to clean carpets, quiet hallways, and doors that locked from the outside. Sergeant Harris saw him again 3 days after the boys vanished. Same car. Same hat. Same face that looked like it had learned how to forget things professionally. The car sat near the bridge like it had grown roots. Engine off. Windows up. Watching. Harris walked over slowly, boots soft in the dirt. The window slid down an inch. "Just enough." "You lost?" Harris asked. The man smiled like a signature on a document no one read. "Just enjoying the view." The river smelled worse that day. Heat rotting the water. Frogs croaking like broken alarms. Flies thick and lazy. That night, a local kid swore he saw lights out on the water. Not lanterns. Not flashlights. Cold lights. White. Moving wrong. His father slapped the back of his head and told him to stop reading comic books. But comic books don't usually leave tire tracks. Harris found them the next morning. Narrow. Military. Or government. Or just expensive. Someone was putting too much effort into a simple disappearance. That's when the word facilities first whispered through town. Not said out loud. Never out loud. Just in half-finished sentences. Up the road there's a. You didn't hear it from me, but. They don't like attention. People avoided the bridge without knowing why. Dogs growled at empty spaces. Radios hissed on certain frequencies like they were chewing on secrets. And the river. The river started giving back strange things. A shoe that wasn't a boy's. A piece of rope that smelled like oil and metal. A knot that looked like it had been tied by someone who'd been taught, not guessed. Harris stood on the bank and felt his teeth grind. "Someone's been here," he whispered to the water. The water didn't argue. It just kept moving. And somewhere, a door closed softly. Locked. Chapter 8, What the Water Refused. Dawn came in dirty colors. Not gold. Not pink. Just a tired gray that looked like it had given up halfway through the job. Fog dragged itself across the river, thick and slow, like breath from something too large to name. The water was quiet. Too quiet. Even the frogs had shut up, like they'd seen enough to last a lifetime. Sergeant Harris reached the bend before the sun had fully climbed. His boots left deep marks in the mud. They looked heavier than they should have been. He felt heavier too. Coffee hadn't helped. Sleep hadn't come. The river was starting to live in him, wet and cold, refusing to leave. He spotted it before he wanted to. Something that didn't belong. Something caught under the roots of a fallen tree. Metal. Not shiny. Not new. Scuffed. Used. Abused. A length of chain. His jaw tightened. His cigarette dropped into the mud, and he crushed it without thinking. 2 uniformed officers moved in behind him. Younger. Cleaner. Still believing in rules like children believe in monsters. "You seeing this too?" one whispered. "Unfortunately," Harris said. They pulled at it together. Boots slipping. Hands shaking. The chain resisted, then surrendered. And with it, a shoe. Small. Worn. A boy's. Eddie's name was stitched into the inside of the tongue, crooked and fading, like it had tried to escape being remembered. Nobody spoke. There are moments when words feel like crimes. The chain led further into the water. They didn't follow it. Not because they were cowards. Because they suddenly understood something worse. This wasn't a drowning. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. Someone had made a careful, deliberate choice and used the river as the final paragraph. Later that day, the official report would say, "Item recovered. Believed to be unrelated." It was a beautiful lie. It was signed neatly. Filed carefully. Forgotten loudly. Harris stood there until the fog burned away and left only the smell of rotten oil and quiet violence. The water refused to give back more. And that refusal said more than any confession ever could. Chapter 9, Signed Silence. The conference room smelled like polish and surrender. Fresh coffee that no one drank. Chairs arranged too neatly. A flag in the corner that had never seen anything worse than dust. The kind of room where truth learned to whisper or die. Sergeant Harris sat at the table with his hat in his hands. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who'd stared at a wall too long and started to see cracks in the air. Across from him sat men who didn't introduce themselves. They never did. Names were for people who planned to be remembered. A folder slid across the table. Thin. Too thin. Case summary, one of them said, voice smooth as oiled wood. Harris opened it. Accident. Misadventure. No evidence of foul play. The words were lined up like soldiers. Polite. Obedient. Completely false. There was a chain, Harris said. Silence. There was a shoe. With a name in it, he added. The man opposite him smiled like a father humoring a difficult child. Rivers move things, he said. They complicate stories. People complicate stories, Harris said back. The smile hardened. Sign the report. It wasn't a request. Harris thought of the boys' mothers. Of coffee gone cold on kitchen tables. Of shoes by the door that would never be kicked off again. Of the river, slow and patient and honest in its own cruel way. He picked up the pen. It felt heavier than his gun. He signed. Ink bled into paper like a quiet confession. By afternoon, the file was stamped and buried. By evening, the town was informed that everything was handled. The search stopped. The ropes were pulled in. The boots were cleaned. Mothers screamed into pillows. Fathers fixed fences that didn't need fixing. And Harris? He washed his hands in a sink that never quite lost the smell of iron. Silence had a signature now. And it wasn't the boys. Chapter 10, The Joke the River Kept. Years passed the way water passes a stone. Without apology. Without memory. The river near Albany kept moving. It carried beer bottles, leaves, oil slicks, lost toys, and the bones of a story nobody wanted to tell at dinner tables. The bridge rusted slowly. The reeds grew taller. The mud learned new names. Thomas and Eddie became words people avoided. Those boys. Back then. Strange business. That was their immortality. Sergeant Harris retired early. Not on paper. In his bones. His hands shook when he held a cup. Not from age. From remembering. Some nights he swore he could hear chains scraping stone, even when he was nowhere near water. Sometimes he laughed at it. A dry, cracked laugh. Good job, boys, he'd mutter to the dark ceiling. We kept the river safe from the truth. That was the joke. The world didn't end. The government didn't collapse. No great confession came out of a locked drawer. Just 2 empty rooms. 2 unused beds. 2 pairs of shoes that were never thrown away. The town stayed polite. The men in clean suits found other tables and other pens. And the river. The river kept the only records that never got shredded. It remembered the weight of the chain. The soft slap of frightened hands against dirty water. The way secrets sink slower than bodies. There is no moral. There is no neat ending. Only a quiet understanding that sometimes justice is just paperwork, and truth is just something wet and heavy rolling along the bottom. People still walk that riverbank. They skip stones. They tell their children not to go too far. They don't say why. The water moves around their reflections and doesn't answer questions. It never has. It never will. Because the funniest joke in the world is this. Sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. Sometimes it just learns how to swim better than anyone can search. The end.